At worst, it makes the media stand out in a way that very little else can accomplish, but at best, it can become a game changer for the medium. I don't think Persona 5 will quite manage that.
I've been playing Fire Emblem games for a while, but I've always seen the series as incredibly niche and all in all not very good. Now that's not to insult Fire Emblem games. I love all the ones I've played, but they are typically just super chess with a tropey, mediocre story plastered on top. There's very little gameplay variety, the pacing is all over the place, and certain mechanics are less fun and more infuriating. So when a new core series game was announced for the Switch, the first one on a home console in over a decade, I was excited but ready for disappointment. The announcement came shortly after I was ready to put down the previous game in the series, Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valencia. Echoes is far and away my favorite Fire Emblem game. It has full and excellent voice acting, a great story by Fire Emblem standards, a new set of dungeon crawling and exploration systems that, while not very fleshed out, gave a very welcome reprieve from the core gameplay of the series, a solid cast of likable characters, and a take on the weapon and magic system that I personally find much more palatable than a typical Fire Emblem game. Or at least it was far and away my favorite game in the series. Because then Three Houses came along and blew it out of the water, making Echoes look like an incomplete product by comparison. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was skeptical of Three Houses when it was announced, mainly because it looked less like Echoes and more like its predecessors, Awakening and Fates. Both titles were pretty mediocre and didn't hold my attention past the first few playthroughs. Additionally, the long wait with very little information between the announcement for Three Houses and its actual release dampened my excitement. And then it came out and I played 70 hours of it in a week. I was already enjoying it when something happened that legitimately shocked me and made me appreciate Three Houses in a way that I never would have thought possible for a Fire Emblem game. So this is your massive spoiler warning, one of the few times I think you should probably heed it if you plan on playing Three Houses. Here's the scene in question.
You have disappointed me, Edelgard. To think that a descendant of House Hresmelg would dare betray the Holy Church.
So, it is my teacher who stands in my way. I always knew it would come to this.
Professor, kill Edelgard at once. She is a danger to all of Fodlan. Such a rebellious heart cannot be allowed to keep beating.
Alright, context time. This is going to be a long one. Fire Emblem Three Houses is the 16th game in the core Fire Emblem series, created by Intelligent Systems and published by Nintendo. In 1990, Intelligent Systems released the inaugural title, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, followed 2 years later by Fire Emblem Gaiden, which is primarily known for being the black sheep of the series. In 1994, a remake of Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, plus an entirely new sequel packaged together as Mystery of the Emblem was released. This era of Fire Emblem games was finally finished off with Genealogy of the Holy War in 1996, and in 1999, the one that never got released outside of Japan, but is apparently really good according to die-hard fans, Thracia 776. Fire Emblem would next move away from home consoles and towards handhelds with The Binding Blade in 2002 and its prequel, The Blazing Blade in 2003, which is known for being the first game in the series to get a Western release. One more handheld title, The Sacred Stones, was released in 2004 before Fire Emblem would briefly return to home consoles with Path of Radiance and its sequel, Radiant Dawn, in 2005 and 2007 respectively. 2008 saw Shadow Dragon, another remake of Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, released once again for a handheld console, with New Mystery of the Emblem, a remake of Take Your Best Guess, hot on its heels in 2010. New Mystery of the Emblem is notable as it was the first time a player insert character made an appearance, a feature that has been in every non-remake game since. In 2012, the game widely praised for saving the series, Awakening, was released. It brought a legion of new fans to the heretofore minuscule player base, and got Nintendo to see the series as a major IP once again after years of dwindling relevance. In an attempt to live up to the expectations created by Awakening, Intelligent Systems next released a trio of games, collectively known as Fates, in 2015. In many ways, Fates was a prototype, as many of the ideas it first presented would later be refined and improved upon for Three Houses. Fates told the same events with 3 different outcomes. Conquest, a more difficult game where your insert character chooses to stay with their adoptive but somewhat sinister family. Birthright, an easier experience where they decide to return to their birth family. And Revelations, the bad one. After taking a short break to remake Gaiden as Echoes Shadows of Valencia in 2017, Fire Emblem finally returned to home consoles with its largest and most ambitious title to date, Three Houses. Three Houses takes place on the continent of Fodlan, which is split into 3 countries, the Adrestian Empire, the Holy Kingdom of Fergus, and the Leicester Alliance. You take on the role of Byleth, an emotionally stunted but extremely effective mercenary with a goddess living inside their head. You're roped into a teaching job at Garrigmach Monastery after saving 3 students of the monastery's academy from a bandit attack. The academy's students are split into the titular 3 houses, the Black Eagles for residents of the Empire, the Blue Lions for those from the Kingdom, and the Golden Deer for students hailing from the Alliance. Upon arriving at the monastery, you are allowed to choose which house you are put in charge of. Over time, you teach your students how to fight, growing closer to them and becoming their therapist in the process. You put down some minor rebellions and protect the monastery from a group of insidious ne'er-do-wells known as those who slither in the dark, and their apparent partner, the Flame Emperor. Everything comes to a head when you join your father in protecting the monastery from students who have turned into demonic beasts due to the influence of Creststones. I suppose that requires some explaining. So the world of Three Houses is dictated by a strict caste system, with crest-bearing nobility at the top. Crests are a manifestation of magical blood granted to heroes from 1,000 years ago by the goddess and her children. They grant varying levels of power to their bearers, and nobles often marry for the purpose of securing a crest line for their family. As there's no guarantee a child will be born with one, nobles usually disinherit any offspring who lack a crest. Additionally, a crest bearer is capable of wielding a powerful relic that was originally used by the first bearer of their crest. These relics are powered by crest stones embedded in them, and anyone who attempts to use a hero's relic or a crest stone while lacking a crest themselves turns into a demonic beast. So anyway, after defeating some demonic beasts with your students and your dad, a slither stabs your unsuspecting father in the back, killing him. Which would be pretty surprising if the game wasn't hitting you over the head with tropes and cliches, practically screaming your dad is gonna die soon. In the process of hunting down the killer, you fuse with Sothis, the goddess in your head, and effectively become a time god. Afterwards, a ritual is held by the shady archbishop of the church, who your dad explicitly didn't trust, and, as was recently revealed, implanted Sothis into you when you were born. But as the ritual is beginning, the scene I showed you earlier takes place. The Flame Emperor is revealed to be Edelgard, the leader of the Black Eagle House and future emperor of the Adrestian Empire. This twist is completely concealed by the pretty generic storytelling that's been the norm up to this point. It's surprising because of how obvious the rest of the plot has been. And because it's concealed so well, the emotional and moral decision that you have to make, if you're playing the Black Eagle's house at least, comes without any time to prepare or evaluate. It becomes a snap decision based on the player's ideals that drastically changes the second half of the game. Up until this point, you've been training Edelgard along with all your other students. You've formed a strong connection with her, both by learning about her personality and uncovering her past through the story sections, and by training and controlling her as a combat unit. Then all of a sudden, she's an enemy that you have to defeat. But it isn't so simple. You don't know the full story, so you can choose to trust there's more to the situation and protect her, or you might feel completely betrayed and try to kill her. Alternatively, if you're playing one of the other two routes, this reveal is less emotionally impactful, but it does reframe the story in an unexpected way. All of a sudden, the obviously evil, inhuman bad guys are shunted to the background for a moral conflict between humans with opposing viewpoints and goals. Edelgard isn't evil and has valid reasons for her actions. She's been physically and emotionally traumatized due to the influence of the crest system and is working towards what she, and others, myself included, see as a righteous goal. Some people see her actions, which result in many deaths and a war that lasts 5 years, and conclude that the ends don't justify her means, while others see her as a misguided and manipulated villain who needs to be stopped. Three Houses lets you make a decision based on your values instead of dragging you along a predetermined path with an explicit message like most games. This twist is also an interesting divergence from other recent Fire Emblem games, and most RPGs with a player insert for that matter, in that it creates a situation where the player character affects the outcome of the story, but they aren't directly connected to the plot. Instead, they are drawn along by the bonds they formed with the other inhabitants of Garreg Mach. Sure, Bile is a part of Rhea's plan to resurrect her mother, but Rhea isn't working towards some larger goal. She's just been stuck on the bargaining stage of grief for 1,000 years. Edelgard, on the other hand, takes the role that's normally reserved for the player. She has goals, was in direct conflict with multiple parties long before the beginning of the story, and is either in part or totally responsible for nearly every plot point. This makes her compelling and proactive in a series where most major characters are very reactive. Even in Three Houses, only a handful of other characters are actively working towards something, and in my opinion, they have less going on than Edelgard does. This, in a way, actually makes Edelgard the main character of Three Houses, which is both incredibly bold for an RPG and incredibly appreciated. It gives the story much more flexibility in how it can affect the world and characters, since it's no longer restricted by the need to conform to player choice. Now that's not to say the player doesn't affect the story. They get to choose the winner of the war and the future of the continent after all. But letting the player take a back seat as a reactive character whose decisions don't entirely shape the story leads to a less artificial feeling plot. I started this with a clip from my Persona 5 video, and I think that game is a good point of comparison. The main character of Persona 5, Joker, has intrinsic goals outside of the player's control. That's fine in theory, but because the game has to let the players feel like they are Joker instead of just controlling him, it can lead to certain awkward disconnects in the story. This is most evident when the player's personality and actions are in complete conflict with Joker's. For example, Joker is a 16 to 17-year-old high school student with a definitive sense of justice who spends the vast majority of the game stopping corrupt adults from exploiting others. You, as Joker, can choose to date his homeroom teacher, resulting in a relationship that can only be described as exploitative on the part of an adult. This option exists because some people are role-playing as Joker, and others are role-playing as themselves in Joker's position. But this makes Joker into a character with inconsistent morals, goals, and values, hurting the overall quality of the story. Byleth, on the other hand, doesn't have any inherent goals or values. This lets the player make whatever decisions they want without impacting the consistency of the story. However, that only works because Edelgard does have inherent goals and values that push the story along. I really hope other RPGs take this approach in the future, although I'm not sure how effective this tactic would be in different scenarios. In my Persona video, I expressed a desire for other RPGs to implement some of the great aspects of Persona 5 into future titles. Fire Emblem Three Houses does that in many ways. There's a heavier emphasis on the social interaction mechanics. You have the ability to walk around a physical space, to see every character and talk to them, eat lunch with them, cook, sing, and more with them. The world changes month to month, with special events taking place at specific times, and there's even a surprisingly fleshed out fishing minigame. And while all that is vital to making Three Houses an excellent game, as opposed to just an excellent Fire Emblem game, the best and most important aspect of its success is entirely its own. The fantastically deep, morally gray, character-driven story.
Reach for my hand.